We're here in St. John's, Newfoundland, and in the distance you can see Cabot Tower, Signal Hill, on which Cabot Tower rests. It's one of the famous landmarks of this city in the very eastern edge of Newfoundland, and the edge of the North Atlantic, and it's there that Marconi received the first wireless message from across the Atlantic in 1901. But where I'm standing is Mount Pleasant Cemetery, and I'm here for a very specific reason, because it has a strong connection to a book that I've written called Land Beyond the Sea. And in this cemetery is buried one of the victims of that disaster from October 1942, when the SS Caribou was torpedoed by a German U-boat. We're here in Mount Pleasant Cemetery in St. John's, and this is the grave site of Agnes Wilkie. And as you see by the date, she died the 14th of October 1942. Agnes was aboard the Caribou when it was torpedoed and sank. She was a nursing sister. That means she was a nurse with the Royal Canadian Navy. She grew up in Manitoba, but she found herself stationed in St. John's, Newfoundland, as part of the military hospital here. In the month previous, her and a close friend of hers traveled from St. John's on leave back to the prairies. Agnes to Manitoba, of course, to Carmen, Manitoba, and her friend, Margaret Brooke, to Saskatchewan. And on their return, they were unfortunate enough to board the Caribou on this fateful night. Once the ship was torpedoed, they were thrown into the water. Remember, there were only 5 minutes from the time the torpedo struck to the time the ship went down. Her and her friend, who had been in a cabin together, were thrown into the water, and they clung to an overturned lifeboat. They had no chance of getting aboard the boat. They just clung on to the boat and to each other, hoping for rescue in the morning, several hours later, as dawn broke. Margaret survived, and she held on to her friend, but Agnes grew increasingly weaker, and in the end, with hypothermia and so on, was no longer able to hold on, no longer even to hold on to her friend, and she drifted away and died. Her body was found the next morning, taken to Port aux Basques on the west coast of Newfoundland, transported in here to St. John's, and she's buried in this cemetery. There's nothing here other than the date to indicate that she might be related to the events of the Caribou. There's a fair number of military graves in this graveyard, and it's nice to come in, and I've seen the grave before, but plan to come on a fairly regular basis to remember her. She is the only female in the Royal Canadian Navy to have died as a result of enemy action during the whole of the Second World War. Hello, my name is Kevin Major. I'm here in St. John's, Newfoundland, and I'm part this year of the Tambolo Multicultural Festival. Very pleased to be part of that. And I'm doing a reading. I'm an author. So I've written a book called Land Beyond the Sea. And it's a historical novel based on the story of the sinking of the ferry that runs between Nova Scotia and Newfoundland during the Second World War. it was sunk by a German U-boat. So I'm going to do some small, short segments of reading from the book, introduce you to some of the characters. The stewardess aboard the ship, his name is Bridget Fitzpatrick, but they call her Bride. And she's 61 years old. She's from Bay Roberts in Newfoundland. And this is what she's been thinking about. She's been called many things, but mostly bride. She's never been one, and now at 61, it's not likely she ever will. Still, the woman has no regrets. From what Bride knows of men, she looks back on her life and thinks herself the one blessed. Now she has the good fortune of meeting the man of her dreams, her long-lost dreams, 10 times a day, every day she's aboard. Canadians, Americans, Brits, Newfoundlanders, trim and uniformed and full of charms she hardly wants to imagine. Some so young and wanton it makes the gap between the years an abyss. But better this than nothing at all, she's long ago concluded. It keeps her mind active. It does that, to be sure. Miss Fitzpatrick, he calls her. The young man is in desperate need of something she's not quite been able to put her finger on. Not exactly. The uniform he's wearing is that of a ship's steward. Unfortunately, he won't get him very far with any of the young ladies aboard the Caribou. She calls him Johnny. He'd prefer John. He waits patiently until he has her attention. The Stricklands are wanting a larger cabin. There's 4 of them, and only 2 single bunks. There are no more cabins. Bride stands there until she sees John turn and head down the stairwell. She's thinking there's a chance he might make chief steward someday. The potential is there, she's concluded, once he settles down and gets a few more years under his belt. So we see a bit of Bride and Johnny, who is also an important character in the story. Now we'll turn to the captain of the ship. The captain's name is Ben Taverner. He's a well-known Newfoundlander of the time, and he's captained this ferry for quite a number of years. But he's leery of traveling across this strait with rumors of German U-boats in the vicinity. A mariner who smokes a pipe does well to do it on deck, even in winter. Though it's not quite winter yet, it's an October night on the dull black deck of the ship he has captained for 14 years. The deck is faintly burnished by the moon. Ben Taverner has one hand clamped against the enameled iron railing, drawing on his well-aged briar in an erratic rhythm calculated not to show any spark. He has constantly drawn from it peace of mind, but tonight the tobacco has gone dead and no amount of effort renews it. A disembodied voice, "Captain, sir." There's a tautness to the words that irks Taverner, though he'd never raise it to this 3rd officer, his son. Taverner answers with the officer's proper name, Harold. With each step, Harold reveals more of himself emerging from the black of night, his cap-shrouded features last of all. There is containment in the look he gives his father, in the portion his father can detect even face to face that deepens the unease. For the moment he looks older than Stanley, the other son aboard. Harold is 24. For several months now, Ben Taverner has been at odds to understand his son, why he's so eager to stand up for the Canadians. They were caught by surprise, as Harold would have it, and they're all doing as they can under the circumstances, including, it goes without saying, ignoring warnings from the man who knows the Cabot Strait better than anyone alive. The SS Caribou is a civilian vessel, but more than half of Taverner's 191 passengers are military on their way back to their bases in Newfoundland. And not for a second does Taverner believe German intelligence isn't aware of that. You probably notice a difference in talking about Canada versus Newfoundland. This is 1942. So it's several years before Newfoundland became part of Canada. It was its own country at that time. Much of the book is told from the perspective of the German U-boat captain. His name is Ulrich Graf. He's only 26 years old, and he captains U-69. We slipped into the Gulf of St. Lawrence on the last day of September. On the bridge, the wind stirring a heavy spray, I caught my first sight of Newfoundland. A U-boat commander knows better than to be lured by the sight of land, but nothing has prepared me for the way that hulking rock defied the North Atlantic seas. As if its maker had chiseled breastwork of granite and dared the seas to exhaust themselves against it. This island in all its mockery, this jagged barricade against the unrelenting wind, against the thundery of ocean waves. Sunlight turns any landmass to good, but Newfoundland on a rough day is magnificent. Its lofty cliffs indomitable, the surf capable of no more than playing at its feet. If it were not war, if I were not a Navy man, I would walk this island merely to gaze on such a wild, magnificent specimen of nature. For now, I must be satisfied to linger at its edge and let the war unfold. I have orders to follow and patrols to bring to their end. What quickens me now is a roar of life and death that requires every particle of my mind. A U-boat commander brings to balance the weights of genesis and destruction, the latter unavoidable, if the first is to breathe again. And finally, the U-boat sights the Caribou. The curtain does nothing to isolate me from the ambivalence of life aboard a U-boat. Whatever prize a patrol delivers, uncertainty follows, a misstep away from catastrophe, an equal step from glory. I breathe and a tangle of breaths are meters away, except for the 4 men on the bridge, a pair in the engine room, another in the control room. The crew is fitfully dormant. Even so, they are raw with conviction, fixed to a life as few ever are. In the fog of my half-sleep, half-faith, there is a lull. I know it in the cadence within my chest, slowed to something resembling stoicism. Life goes on. But then, at its most restful, sudden uproar from the control room, commander to the bridge, black smoke. I am on my feet in an instant, grabbing the binoculars into the control room, a scramble to the conning tower and the bridge. Show me! I turn to the quadrant where exec's binoculars are trained. 40 degrees, Hagman pronounces. A trail of soot visible to the naked eye. The view through the binoculars verifies its source. The shadow of a steamer belching black against the murkiness of a moon-faint sky. I fix to it. A freight and passenger steamer. Behind it a second shadow. An escort without doubt. What do you make of it, Captain? Make of it? A steamer in total blackout? There's only one thing to make of such a vessel. The ferry crossing the strait on its route to Newfoundland. Make of it? A target. There can be no doubt. Military aboard, as we know from intelligence. Civilians as well. The other steadfast conclusion, the briefest pause, an intake of air. I'm very pleased to know that the book has been translated into German and will be published in Germany this fall. Thank you very much.